Hi everyone, welcome to Yoga LJ. My name is LJ. I'm a yoga teacher and a registered nurse, and today I will talk to you about Adho Mukha Svanasana. So in Sanskrit, Adho means down, Mukha, face, Svana, dog. Everybody knows this pose. It's downward dog, downward facing dog. And it's probably one of the most popular yoga poses. It is considered an inversion, and this pose helps us improve our posture. What I find interesting about downward facing dog is that it's the only pose in the series that we come back home to. This is considered a resting pose. This is where we find our breath, we notice our awareness, we cultivate a sense of balance. And when we eventually find stillness, and it's probably one of the first poses where we do find stillness, we go deeper and notice more specific imbalances, like if you have one leg shorter, longer than the other, if you have one arm stronger or weaker than the other, we notice those imbalances and we correct them in this pose. So it's quite important and beneficial pose. So I will start by demonstrating what it looks like, and then I'll get into the anatomical cues, and I'll finish with modifications, including if you're hypermobile, you have tight hamstrings or shoulders. If you have a wrist or shoulder injury, you do want to be cautious in downward dog and try one of the modifications. So we'd be starting from upward dog. We would finish the inhalation in upward dog, Urdhva Mukha, and then we would start the exhalation for downward dog by pushing the floor away from us, flexing the feet, lift the hips, roll over the feet, downward dog. Pushing tops of thighs back, wide shoulders away from the ears, gazing to the navel. So that's what it would look like after some practice. Typically, what we would do for this pose is start from our hands and knees when we first start learning the pose. So knees would be hip width. Your hands are shoulder width just in front of the shoulders. Curl your toes under and find your palms pressing to the ground and externally rotate the upper arm. So we're pronating the hand while externally rotating the upper arm. And this creates a ringing effect in the arm, which brings energy up the arm. And the infraspinatus at the back of the shoulder blade will help externally rotate the humerus bone to keep the wide shoulders and push them back away from the ears. So once you find your arms, hands, and shoulders, then you would curl your toes under, and then without changing anything, exhale, lift your knees back to a downward dog. So that would be a better way to start learning the pose. Once you have the arms and shoulders, we would engage the core. The hip flexors are engaged. The pelvis is tilted forward, and the sitting bones are pushing up towards the ceiling. The tops of thighs are pressing straight back, eventually heels to the ground. The inner thighs are spinning back as well. So we're stretching the back of the legs and the spine while we strengthen the arms and shoulders and front of the legs. So if you're someone who has tight shoulders, or you're still working on upper body strength, in the beginning, it's probably going to look like this. You probably will keep your weight forward in downward dog with rounding in the back. This is quite common. So in addition to bending our knees when we first start doing the pose, what you can do is push your chest or low ribs towards your thighs. So that's the direction. So by pushing your chest towards your thighs, you create more space for your shoulders and you're lengthening your spine. And if you have really tight hamstrings and you're keeping your knees bent, you still feel tightness in your hamstrings, you can shorten your stance and that'll make it easier for you. Also, if your heels are really high off the floor, like 1 or 2 inches off the floor, probably because of tight hamstrings, like so, you can walk your feet into the shorter stance and that will drop your heels closer to the floor, and the pose will be more beneficial for you. You'll get more stretch in your calves. As your heels come down to the ground, then you can lengthen your feet back and widen your stance. And having a wider stance, we do experience more stretch and strengthening in the pose, as long as it's not too wide. If the stance is too wide, then we end up risking injuring or straining our wrist and shoulders. So we don't want the stance to be too long or too short, but in the beginning, it can be short, and you gradually bring it to the stance where you get the full benefit of the pose. Now, if you have tight shoulders, another modification that you can do is bring your hands wider than your shoulders and turn your fingers outwards slightly. So this helps to externally rotate your upper arms and find more space for your shoulders when you push back in downward dog. And if you're someone that's hypermobile, you may be at risk for overextending your elbow joint. So then you'd want to push the floor away from you more and keep a micro bend in your elbow, and make sure that you're not collapsing your shoulders and your back. So you really need to be aware of your shoulders on your back and your elbow joint if you're hypermobile. So another modification, especially if you have a shoulder injury, is to start on the wall. So you would bring your feet hip width and your hands on the wall at a right angle, so your wrists are about shoulder height. And then you would drop your head down. And so from here, you can feel the strength in the arms and the external rotation of the upper arms with the infraspinatus engaged. Another option, if you have really tight hamstrings, you want to drop your heels closer to the ground, is to use blocks. So blocks will give you extra height in the pose by bringing your hands on the blocks, and then you'll feel more that your heels are coming closer to the ground. So I hope that you enjoy your Adho Mukha Svanasana. It's a very beneficial pose to learn. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Bye, everyone.